is no culture without freedom of expression.
Instead of standing up for Canadians, these folks are standing up for the Googles, etc. Mr. Speaker, I ask them to come onto the right side and please support Canadians and people who produce these content.
The Honourable.
What if one morning you woke up, went to work, and discovered your paycheck was gone not because you were fired, not because you quit, but because the government had quietly decided you no longer had permission to work? Imagine opening your banking app only to find your account frozen, your access denied, and every dollar you thought was yours suddenly out of reach. Sounds like a scene from a dystopian thriller, doesn't it? Yet this isn't fiction. This is the world some leaders are openly preparing for, and unless people pay attention, it could become our reality far sooner than we think. Chapter 1. The Shadow of Digital Identity. The story begins not in Canada, but across the Atlantic. In London, Prime Minister Keir Starmer walked onto the stage at the Global Progress Action Summit, delivering a speech that left jaws on the floor. In a calm, almost routine tone, he announced a policy that critics had warned about for years. By the end of this parliament, the United Kingdom would require every single worker to possess a government-issued digital ID. No ID, no job. Simple as that. The announcement wasn't just bold. It was chilling. Overnight, the right to work, a basic pillar of individual freedom, was transformed into a privilege dependent on a centralized system. Those in the audience clapped politely, but the real shock came when cameras panned to the crowd. Sitting there, applauding, was none other than Canada's own Prime Minister, Mark Carney. The image of Carney smiling as this plan was unveiled told Canadians more than any official statement ever could. Because what happens in London rarely stays in London. Policies tested abroad often find their way into Canadian law. And the groundwork has already been laid. Canada's quiet preparations for years. Ottawa has been moving pieces on the chessboard toward its own national digital identity. Few citizens noticed. It started with reports buried in the Auditor General's findings, articles tucked into friendly media outlets, and experimental trial programs hidden within Treasury Board documents. On the surface, it all looked harmless. Officials framed it as streamlining government services. Why juggle multiple logins when one secure federal system could replace them all? Why manage separate portals for taxes, healthcare, employment insurance, and banking, when a single ID could give you access to everything at once? Convenience. That's always the selling point. And at first glance, it does sound appealing. One login instead of 10. Faster processing. Less hassle. Who wouldn't want that? But here's the catch. Convenience often hides the cost of control. When identity, banking, employment, and even health records are all fused into one centralized system, you're not just making life easier, you're handing the keys of your entire existence to the government. The darker side of innovation. Starmer's justification in the UK was that digital IDs would help curb undocumented immigration and restore order in the labor market. That sounds practical, almost responsible. Carney has used the same language in Canada, repeating the mantra of pragmatism. But behind that polished rhetoric lies a disturbing truth. This isn't about immigration paperwork. It's about seizing control over identity itself. Once the government becomes the gatekeeper of your ability to work, bank, or travel, your freedom is no longer unconditional. It is conditional contingent on compliance. And if that sounds extreme, think back just a few years. During the pandemic, governments across the world froze bank accounts of citizens who supported protests. That was done without a unified digital ID system. Imagine how much easier it would be if every transaction, every login, and every paycheck passed through a single government-controlled portal. Digital currency. The other piece of the puzzle. The Canadian debate over digital ID has never been separate from the push for a central bank digital currency, CBDC. Together, these two initiatives form a perfect trap. Picture money that isn't really yours. A dollar that Ottawa could decide how, when, or even if you're allowed to spend. In China, their version already includes expiration date savings that vanish if the government decides you've held on to them too long. Imagine that creeping into the Canadian system. Carney and his allies insist Canada's CBDC would be different. They promise it will be innovative, resilient, and secure. They sprinkle in words like blockchain and decentralization to soothe skeptics. But the reality is simple. Real decentralization means less government power. And that is the one thing they will never allow. With a digital ID linked to a programmable currency, freedom becomes an illusion. If you speak out against the government, your account could be flagged. If your spending doesn't align with approved behavior, your purchases could be blocked. Think of it as economic obedience training, hidden behind the facade of modernization. The slippery road from convenience to control supporters say a digital ID is harmless. After all, it's just a login, right? But history tells us a different story. Control rarely arrives all at once. It slips in slowly, disguised as progress. First, you accept it for the sake of convenience. Then, dependency takes root. You can't access your paycheck or your doctor without it. And finally, control emerges. Once you rely on the system for survival, the system owns you. That's how economic freedom transforms into economic slavery. One small step at a time. The global context, this isn't happening in isolation. Back in 2016, the World Economic Forum released its infamous predictions for 2030. At the time, they sounded like marketing slogans. You will own nothing and be happy. Meat will be rare. Housing will be unaffordable. Western values will be tested. Nearly every one of those predictions has begun to unfold. Food prices are climbing. Homeownership is slipping out of reach. Renting is becoming the norm. Societies are reshaping under the weight of mass economic and cultural pressures. And now, digital ID is taking center stage. Just as the WEF envisioned, Mark Carney isn't just clapping in London because he admires British policy. He's clapping because it aligns with his own agenda for Canada's future, where every paycheck, every dollar, and every service funnels through government approval. The contrast with the United States, while Canada edges towards centralized control. The United States presents a stark contrast. Donald Trump, during his first term, RIPPED up international agreements and openly defied globalist structures like the WEF. His stance was blunt. No to centralized IDs. No to digital currencies. For supporters, it was sovereignty in action. For critics, sabotage now. As Trump campaigns again with promises to dismantle digital currency projects and block ID schemes, he represents a path diverging from Canada's. South of the border, the fight is loud and public. North of it, the deals are being struck quietly. Behind closed doors, why this matters for Canadians now face a critical choice. Do they want a future where individual rights are permanent and non-negotiable? Or one where those rights are conditional, granted only if the government system allows them? The danger is subtle but deadly. Freedom doesn't vanish overnight. It dissolves little by little. One login here, one frozen paycheck there. Until one day, Canadians may wake up, realizing that the Canada they thought they lived in is gone, replaced by a system run from overseas boardrooms in Davos. The warning shot, what happened in London, was not just another foreign headline. It was a warning shot, a glimpse into the future that could be waiting for Canada. Starmer's declaration, no digital ID, no job, was more than a policy. It was a blueprint. And Carney's applause wasn't casual. It was endorsement. The question now isn't whether Canada could adopt the same system. The question is when. And more importantly, Will Canadians recognize the threat in time to stop it? Chapter 2. The Trap Tightens. Imagine this. You've spent your life saving for retirement. Every paycheck, every investment, every dollar has been carefully set aside for the day you can finally rest. Then, without warning, the rules change. Suddenly, your money isn't really yours anymore. Your savings are redefined as programmable currency. Now, the government doesn't just regulate the economy, regulates your spending, your groceries. Approved, but only at specific stores. Your travel. Limited if your carbon footprint is deemed too high. That new book you want to buy? Blocked because the author criticized official policy. This isn't a science fiction novel. It is the logical extension of a system where identity and money are centralized under state control, and if you think it can't happen here, look no further than recent history, when freezing accounts became reality during the pandemic. Canadians saw just how quickly financial freedom could vanish. Bank accounts were frozen for citizens who supported protests, sometimes with no trial, no warrant, and no due process. That was without a unified digital ID. Now imagine the same scenario once every paycheck, every purchase. And every login is routed through a single government-controlled ID. Cutting you off becomes as simple as flipping a switch. No need for police raids, no messy court battles. Just a silent click in a database, and your life comes to a halt. This is the bitter irony. Leaders present digital ID and digital currency as modernization, as progress. But in reality, it's a return to one of the oldest forms of control in human history. The power of the few to decide how the many live. Why digital ID? It's more dangerous than it appears to many. Digital ID sounds harmless. After all, don't we already have IDs? Driver's licenses, passports, social insurance numbers, they're nothing new. The difference lies in centralization. With traditional forms of ID, power is spread out. A driver's license gets you on the road, but it doesn't decide whether you can buy groceries. A passport lets you cross borders, but it doesn't determine whether you can post your opinion online. A digital ID changes that. It pulls every thread of your life, your health records, your financial history, your employment, your social media into one single platform. Suddenly, decisions about your life can be made in real time, using algorithms and political directives. Did you attend a protest last year? That might show up. Did you post something critical of policy online? That might be flagged. Did you fall behind on taxes or bills? That could affect your access to services. In short, your entire existence becomes a data profile, and the government holds the power to decide whether that profile is acceptable. The internet, speech, and control. Look at what else is already moving through parliaments across the world. Stricter internet rules. New hate speech laws, plans to monitor online activity more closely. On their own, these are controversial enough. But tied to a digital ID, they create something far more sinister. The government wouldn't need to jail critics anymore. They could simply allow dissenters to speak, but cut off their ability to pay rent, buy food, or travel. The punishment wouldn't be prison. It would be silence through financial suffocation. And remember, only a few years ago, critics warning about mandatory IDs were dismissed as conspiracy theorists. Today, it is official policy in the United Kingdom. Tomorrow, it could be law in Canada. The global web, it's important to recognize that this isn't happening in a vacuum. The World Economic Forum's 2030 vision spelled it out years ago. Their predictions weren't just guesses. They were a roadmap, a society where property is scarce, where renting replaces ownership, where meat is a luxury, and where digital systems enforce compliance. Already, we see food prices rising, housing costs skyrocketing, and younger generations locked out of ownership. Digital ID is simply the next step. It cements control not only over the economy, but over the individual. Canada under Mark Carney is being positioned as a model student in this global classroom, while other nations resist. Canada is edging closer to full adoption of the WEF's playbook. The American divide contrasts this with the United States. South of the border, the fight is loud and out in the open. Trump's campaign pledges to block central bank, digital currency projects, and dismantle centralized ID. Schemes resonate with millions of Americans who fear the same future Canadians face, to Carney and his allies. Trump's actions represent sabotage of the global agenda, to his supporters. They represent salvation, a final stand for sovereignty and freedom. This divide between Canada and the United States highlights the crossroads we now face. Canadians are staring down to possible futures. One leads toward government-controlled identity and programmable money. The other leads toward a messy but genuine independence. The point of no return. Here's the chilling truth. Once these systems are in place, reversing them becomes almost impossible. If you need a digital ID to work, you comply. If your money expires after 6 months, you spend when they tell you to. If you need access to healthcare, you stay in line. Every new layer of dependency makes resistance harder. The cage doesn't slam shut all at once. It closes inch by inch until escape is no longer an option. And by the time people realize it, freedom isn't taking it, has already slipped away. A glimpse of tomorrow. Let's role play. Imagine waking up in 2030. You grab your phone to check your bank balance, but before you can log in, you're prompted to scan your government-issued ID. The system pulls up your file, employment history, taxes, medical records, social media posts, even your search history. This time, there's a red flag. You attended a demonstration last month. The system notes potential risk. Your access is limited. You can't withdraw cash. You can't buy a plane ticket. Even your grocery purchases are capped. You're not in prison. You're not silenced online. You're simply cut off, isolated, and economically strangled until you fall back in line. That's the nightmare critics are warning about. And it's no longer hypothetical. It is unfolding piece by piece. Why Canadians must act now? The debate isn't finished. The laws haven't been etched into stone, but the direction is clear. Every quiet trial program, every friendly media article, every political applause in London points the same way, toward a Canada where freedom itself requires a passcode. And so, Canadians must ask themselves, do you want rights that are permanent, or rights that can be toggled on and off like a switch? Do you want to decide how your money is spent, or do you want Ottawa to decide for you? Do you want a future shaped by independent citizens, or one dictated by global boards in Davos? The final choice. Freedom doesn't vanish with a bang. It dies quietly, smothered under paperwork, policies, and the promise of convenience. Each time we trade independence for efficiency, we lose a little more control. Each time we accept dependency, the walls close in. The announcement in London wasn't just about Britain. It was about the future of the Western world. And for Canadians, it was a flashing red warning light. Carney's applause was not a coincidence. It was a signal. The time to push back is now before digital ID and programmable currency transform Canada into something unrecognizable. Because once the system is in place, the choice will no longer belong to the people. The question that remains is simple but urgent. Will Canadians recognize the threat in time? Or will they wake up in a country where freedom itself has an expiration date?